Good evening, everyone, and welcome from London to tonight's webinar on the fascinating and somewhat controversial country that is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. My name's Johnny Bealby. I founded Wild Frontiers, and tonight we are going to bring you, one of the most interesting and exciting kind of new tourist destinations. First of all, let me just say welcome to everyone joining us from America. We put on this talk primarily for our British audience back in November, where we got over 1,000 people came and joined online. But we decided that we'd kind of missed out somewhat on our American audience, which is just as important. So we decided to put it on again for you guys. So if you're East Coast, West Coast, or somewhere in between, a very warm welcome to you. And as I say, I hope tonight we're going to not only entertain, but hopefully inform you about this new and fascinating travel destination. So this evening, how it's going to work, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Wild Frontiers, because I'm assuming that for some of you, this may be the first time you've come across our company. I will then hand over to Marc Leaderman, who is the Director of Product and Operations here at Wild Frontiers, who was in Saudi Arabia last year, very much just before the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. So he was lucky to get there then. He'll tell you all about traveling in Saudi Arabia. Then he'll hand back to me. I'll talk a little bit more about Wild Frontiers before doing a Q&A session. So do please, if you have any questions, and I'm sure there will be questions, it's a very interesting country and raises a lot of questions, then do please use the Q&A button at the bottom, and we'll try and get round to as many questions as we can. We are recording tonight's webinar, so we will send this to you in a link tomorrow in an email, where we will also answer other questions if we don't get around to answering them all. So you'll be able to share the webinar with friends, or indeed watch it again if you so wish. Right, so let me crack on now and tell you a little bit about Wild Frontiers. In order to do that, I'm going to share my screen. So just bear with me 1 minute. And hopefully, yeah, here we go. Good, so that's me. Back in the 90s, I did 3 big journeys. I rode a motorbike right the way around Africa. I walked through parts of India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And I rode a horse along the Silk Road, about 3,000 miles from Kashgar to the Caspian Sea. These adventures led to 3 travel books, Running with the Moon, about the motorcycle journey, For a Pagan Song, about the journey through India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan in the footsteps of Rudyard Kipling's famous story, The Man Who Would Be King, and Silk Dreams, Troubled Road, about the horse ride along the Silk Road. But perhaps more pertinent to tonight's talk, it also gave rise to Wild Frontiers. While I was in Pakistan, I was up in the Hindu Kush region, right up on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I spent 3 months with a group of people called the Kalash. And somebody there suggested that I start a travel company and bring foreigners into this such interesting part of the world, which is what I did. That was 20 years ago. Now things have moved on rather a lot. And we run small groups and tailor-made travel to 90 destinations worldwide. That's Indian subcontinent, Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, Central Asia, you name it. Most of the developing world, we run some fascinating trips to, as I say, both as far as group tours and also on a tailor-made private basis. A bit closer to home, that's closer to our home over here in the UK rather than necessarily your home in America. We've also developed during the COVID period some trips to Western Europe, which have proved very popular in Italy, Spain, Turkey, Portugal, and Greece. So if you don't fancy going into the developing world this year, then come over to Europe, which is about to open up to Americans, and come over and have some great journeys over here. I've been lucky enough to travel quite a lot in the Middle East. I think, last count, I think I've been to about 104 countries, and I've traveled quite a lot in places like Syria, Oman, Jordan, Lebanon, Iran, to name a few. And I find the Middle East an absolutely fascinating part of the world. Obviously, historically, it goes back so far and is just really, thrives on the local energy, the culture, the geopolitics, everything that kind of makes up this fascinating part of the world. But I have never been to Saudi Arabia. Marc got that job, as I said, in January last year. We packed him off. As he walked out of the office, I can remember him saying, there's something going on in China. I think it's a bit of a flu. It probably won't come to much, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. How the world has changed since then. Anyway, I am going on too long because you're here to listen to Marc talk about Saudi Arabia. So I'm going to hand over now to Marc, and I'll join you again in about 40 minutes time. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. Good evening from London. If you're over on the East Coast, then good afternoon. And if you are further west, good morning. I too, like Johnny, had been to the Middle East a few times before. I'd been to Jordan, I'd been to Oman, I'd also been to Iran, Yemen, and Iraq, but I'd never been to Saudi. And as Johnny said, I got the opportunity to go there last January. Now, I am going to start sharing my screen because when it comes to talking about Saudi Arabia, a country which is 3 times the size of Texas, it can be really hard to know where to start. So I thought for tonight, I would start with addressing the metaphorical elephant in the room. Because while it's true that when we first launched Saudi Arabia in autumn 2019, it was our fastest selling tour ever. I mean, this was the equivalent, from a tour operator's point of view of a record label, releasing a new Adele album, or if you're a movie mogul, of Marvel Studios releasing the new Avengers movie. So while we had that success, it was equally true that the tour prompted the most amount of comments we'd ever received from our clients, questioning the ethics of running a tour to a destination with such a poor human rights record. And when it comes to poor human rights, you can take your pick with Saudi Arabia. Obviously, you've got its historical treatment of women. You've got the 2017 episode where over 400 prominent Saudis were imprisoned in the Ritz-Carlton. You've got the ongoing war with Yemen. And you've got the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, which is told so harrowingly in the film The Dissident. And undeniably, Saudi Arabia is a controversial country. And traveling to controversial countries does raise a lot of difficult questions. But real travel often does, and we think that it's okay to ask questions and maybe even to be conflicted about whether or not you should travel to such destinations. And I'm not here, and we're not here to tell anyone what they should or shouldn't do, but maybe what I can do is at least explain from our perspective why we are offering it and what our motivation and rationale behind that is. And really it falls into 3 categories. And the first is the fact that going to a country and meeting its people is not the same as condoning or endorsing the policies of that country's government. And as an example, I'd just like to tell you a little story from about 20 years ago when I was in Iran with a tour group. And within that group, I had a couple of Americans, a couple of guys from New York. And we were chatting to some Iranians. And after a few minutes, the Americans said to the Iranians, they said, "You know we're American, don't you?" And the Iranians said, "Yes, you've got quite thick accents. It's quite easy to understand you're from America." And the Americans said, "Is that a problem?" And the Iranians looked at them and they said, "Why on earth would that be a problem?" They said, "You're guests in our country." They said, oh, don't get us wrong. They said, we're no big fans of American foreign policy, but why on earth would we judge you according to the actions of your government? And then almost with shock, they went, oh my God, please don't tell us that you're judging us by the actions of our government. And that really stuck with me. And so what I would say that we are obviously aware of and engaged with the issues, we are not a political organization. And then it's the fact that with countries, they rarely make the news for good reasons. And that doesn't mean that bad stuff doesn't happen or that it's all fake news, far from it. But generally, countries are much more nuanced and complex than you might realize if your only experience with them is through the media. So we give people the opportunity to go there and to experience firsthand what it's really like, and maybe also to have their perceptions of that country challenged, should they so wish. And then it's the fact that I strongly believe that tourism, if done well, can really make a difference. And there is something quite magical about taking someone from Riyadh and introducing them to someone from, I don't know, Rhode Island, and putting them together in a room and just really giving them the time to chat, to engage, to debate, to agree, to disagree, and really just to exchange ideas. And it really can help bring down barriers. And so tourism does have a lot of benefits that go along with it. And when you're thinking of tourism, it's worth bearing in mind that while this may be the image that a lot of people have of Saudis, hiring private jets and flying off to the south of France to take over, entire wings of five-star hotels for the summer, that really isn't the reality for the vast majority of its 33 million strong population, many of whom really do struggle to make ends meet on a daily basis. And so by employing drivers, by going to local restaurants, by going to the local market, we have an ability to put money directly into the pockets of those who may need it. So at the end of the day, travel will always be a personal choice. And I just hope that regardless of whether or not you choose to travel to Saudi Arabia with us or some other way, that tonight will be of interest to you regardless. In any case, back to the topic in hand, Saudi Arabia. Now, before I start talking about my trip there and exactly what you can do, I'd just like to give you a brief overview of how Saudi Arabia went from being effectively a desert backwater to being one of the most important countries in the world today. And if you go back to the times before Islam, history of the Arabian Peninsula really starts with the spice trade and its taking of one of the world's most valuable commodities ever, which was the crystallized sap of the frankincense tree. And this resource, frankincense, was taken from what is today southern Oman and Yemen, up through the Hejaz region of Saudi Arabia, which you can see here is the blue line hugging the western side of the Arabian Peninsula, all the way up to Damascus. And at Damascus, that's where it hit the pink line, the Silk Road. And from there, it could either go west towards Europe or east towards Asia. And at that time, the people that were living on the Arabian Peninsula were predominantly the Bedouin Arabs, a fiercely tribal people who made their livings in really one of three ways. One, they would tend to their herds of camels and goats. Another one is they would basically set up these caravans to take spices north towards Damascus and the Silk Road. And thirdly, if they weren't actually involved in the caravans, they would often raid other people's caravans and make their money that way. Now, everything got shaken up in a very critical year, which I'm sure many of you will know. It's the year 622. Now, this is the year that the Prophet Muhammad fled from his hometown of Mecca north to Medina, where he stayed for 8 years building up his power base and eventually came back to Mecca and took it. And on his death, just 2 years later, in the year 632, everything that you can see here in red lay under his control. But interestingly, just a decade later, all power had shifted away from the Arabian Peninsula. First, it went to Damascus under the Umayyad dynasty, and then later it went to Baghdad under the Abbasid dynasty. And although people would still travel to Mecca, it being one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and although Mecca in Arabia would still hold something within the hearts of Muslims, strategically, it became a backwater for the next 1,000 years. Now, getting into more modern history and the rise of the Al Saud tribe, the tribe whose descendants gave their name to Saudi Arabia today, it really starts in the middle of the 18th century when most of the key areas in Arabia are under the control of the Ottoman Turks. Now, being subjugated by the Ottoman Turks, who were seen as decadent and certainly non-Arab, was not something that the Arabs, and certainly not the Al Saud tribe, took very kindly to. And into this arena comes an intriguing man by the name of Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab. Now, he preached a return to the values of the Prophet's time and a purification of Islam. He gave his name to this philosophy, which is known today by his name. You've probably heard of it, Wahhabism. Now, he was able to convert a local sheikh to his ideas, but he was so severe in his punishments that he eventually had to flee for his life, and he was sent into exile. Critically, the decision as to where he went was to have major ramifications for the whole region. He chose to flee to this place. It's called Diraya, and it sits on the outskirts of Riyadh. And it was the home of a local emir from the Al Saud family. The Saud family gave Wahhab political refuge. Wahhab gave the Sauds religious authority. And the two really formed this inseparable bond, which lives on today. And I think the closest Western equivalent that maybe we can understand was the relationship that existed between the Holy Roman Emperors and the popes in medieval times. And cultural heathen that I am, though, I like to see it more just as a partnership, just like Lennon and McCartney. Whatever it was, they thrived together and they grew under these vibes of anti-Ottoman sentiment, to the extent that at the beginning of the 19th century, the Saud family, emboldened by their support from Wahhab, took Mecca away from the Ottomans. Now, this made them heroes in the eyes of all the other Arab tribes who held them as heroes, but they only held on to it for 20 years. The Ottomans came back, kicked them out, and effectively relegated the Saud to exile and in obscurity. And they would have remained that way, almost like a one-hit wonder along the lines of Carl Douglas with his 1974 hit Kung Fu Fighting, were it not for one act. And this was when a descendant of the Saud family in 1902, and this is critical for understanding Saudi Arabia today, took this fortress. This is the Mazmak fortress in Riyadh. He took it away from the Ottomans. He then worked together with the British during World War I to finally kick the Ottomans out of the whole Arabian Peninsula. He retook Mecca once more, and in 1932, he declared himself as ruler of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. His name was Abdulaziz, and he's the current king's father. Now, when he came to power in 1932, Saudi Arabia was not a wealthy country. In fact, it got most of its money, ironically, from tourism, from religious tourism, with people making pilgrimages to Mecca and Medina. But in 1933, just the next year, he signed his first oil concession. And just 4 years later, in 1937, he founded Aramco, the Arabian American Oil Company, a company which today is worth close to $2 trillion. Now, Abdulaziz had about 34 sons. And after his death in 1953, power went first to one of his sons, and then to brother, to brother, to brother. And depending on your age, depending on your interest in the Middle East, some of these names may be more familiar to you than others. There was Saud, then there was Faisal, then there was Khalid, Fahd, Abdullah, and finally Salman, the current king. Now, when Salman came to power in 2015, he was 79 years old. And so effectively, he has made the crown prince, one of his sons, the effective leader of Saudi Arabia. His name is Mohammed bin Salman. You probably know him as MBS. And today he is one of 7,000 Saudi princes. Now, every ruler that has come to Saudi Arabia has faced a challenge as to where on the pendulum their rule is going to sit. Some have looked more to their religious roots, Wahhabism, and they've kept the kind of religious elders on side. Others have looked more to the West and to more progressive ideals, and they've structured their rules somewhere along that curve. The problem with Saudi Arabia is you go too far in one direction and you incur the wrath of the people on the other side. So you start to backtrack and then you incur the wrath of the other people. And at the moment, Saudi Arabia is finding itself still fluctuating between the two. As regards to MBS, he is a controversial figure. He is the man behind the war in Yemen. He is the man behind Khashoggi's murder, but he is also seen as a reformer. He has publicly said that he wants Saudi Arabia to return to a moderate form of Islam, praying 5 times a day, which used to be mandatory and enforced by the feared religious police, the Mutawa. He's openly said it's a personal choice. If you want to pray, you pray. If you don't, you don't. And the Mutawa, the religious police, he's paid them off. They can go on their pensions. He's also granted women the right to drive. They also no longer have to wear headscarves or abayas, and they no longer have to be escorted by a male guardian when they're outside their home. Now, as one journalist said, this is hardly akin to bra burning in 1960s San Francisco, but for Saudi Arabia, it is quite radical, and it is at least a step in the right direction. He's also behind the Vision 2030 project. Now, this is a 14-year, multi-billion-dollar plan to try and diversify the Saudi economy away from oil. Oil at the moment still constitutes 90% of Saudi export revenue, and this causes some problems. One, the price of oil fluctuates greatly, and this causes havoc with the Saudi economy. It also is a finite resource. And also, we are a world which is eventually, gradually pivoting itself away from a dependency on fossil fuels. Combine that with the fact that Saudi Arabia has an incredibly young population. 2/3 of Saudi Arabians are below the age of 30, and they are highly engaged on social media. It's said that 80% of Saudis are on Twitter. So with all this in the mix, it might explain why now is the time that you're seeing all these changes happening in Saudi Arabia. And really, this was the backdrop to my visit there last January. It was the first time that tourist visas were available, and it's being done quite well. It was very easy. I was able to apply online. It was $120, and it's open to 49 nationalities. It came through within a few hours, and it was a very simple process. And this is the trip that ultimately I've put together that I'm going to talk you through just to give you an idea of what Saudi Arabia offers today. And it really is centered around 3 key areas. You've got Jeddah, which is the commercial capital. You've got Al Ula, which is the kind of cultural heritage capital. And then you have Riyadh, which is the political capital. And really, our trip is an 11-day journey going between all of these places, generally running October to March, predominantly to avoid the excessive heat of summer. So starting in Jeddah, Jeddah is seen as the most cosmopolitan of all the cities in Saudi Arabia. It is the traditional gateway to Mecca. It sits on the Red Sea, and it's also seen as one of the most liberal cities in the whole of Saudi. And one of the things that is treasured by people of Jeddah is the Corniche. Now, this runs for 30 kilometers alongside the Red Sea, and it's full of these wonderful sculptures, some of them quite traditional, some of them quite surreal, and it's a great place just to go for a wander and meet with locals. It's also home to the iconic floating mosque, which sits out from the Corniche into the Red Sea. But really, I would say the highlight of Jeddah is the UNESCO Al Balad, which is the old town of Jeddah. And here you will find Ottoman era and earlier merchants' houses and mosques. And you'll find some of the houses have been converted into museums. And inside them, the rooms have been beautifully decorated and are showcasing really some of the wonderful artifacts from Saudi Arabia's history. Some of them are in phenomenal condition, others are not. And this is really an ongoing decades-long project that is getting UNESCO funding to gradually restore the whole of the old town. And you'll even find some of the old buildings there, you'll see constructed with coral. And one of the things that really surprised me as I wandered around the streets of Jeddah was really just the whole artistry of the whole place. You know, there are galleries, there are workshops, there are little academies, and there are art installations everywhere. And it's got a really lovely vibe, and something that I have to admit I wasn't expecting from the gateway to Mecca. And there were cafes, you know, that were really colourful. There were wonderful souks where you could go explore, meet locals, buy whatever you wanted. There were some fascinating bookshops that had some really old books, some of them detailing kind of Lawrence's campaigns. And really kind of down some of the little streets and alleyways, it was a great opportunity to meet Saudis as we were travelling around. So that's Jeddah. From there, we then leave, we head up into the nearby mountains, a place called Taif, which is the summer capital, and it's a center of rose production. And then from there, this is where we start to head into the desert proper. And this is a place called the Al Waba crater, which is over 1 kilometer wide and 200 meters deep. And it's really a great place to go for a walk. It takes about 2.5 hours to go up and down. It's not difficult, but if people want to, they can stick to the crater rim. And there was almost no one else around, and it was quite a spectacular place. From there, we then head northwards towards Medina. Now, if you remember, this is the place where Muhammad fled to in 622. At the time, it was predominantly a Jewish town called Yithrib, and today it is home to the second largest mosque in the world, known as the Prophet's Mosque, which can accommodate 1 million worshippers. Now, one of the things with Medina has always been how close can non-Muslims get to the center of Medina? And it used to be, in more conservative times, you weren't allowed within the 3rd ring road. That's not true now. I stayed in a hotel inside the 3rd ring road, but the big question was how close could you actually get? No one knows. You ask 10 people, you'll get 15 different opinions. All I can tell you is that is the Prophet's Mosque. I got to within about 100 meters of it. I thought that's probably about as close as I'm going to risk it. And for our first groups that go out there, I have no idea. We'll just have to play it by ear because there's still no official announcement as to how near you can get. In any case, when we leave Medina, we will then head north following the path of the Hejaz Railway. Now, this was an Ottoman project started in 1900 with the aim of building a railway from Damascus all the way down to Mecca in order to ease the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. And by 1908, they had built 1,600 kilometers of the railway and got as far as Medina. But it being such a flagship project of the Ottomans made it the perfect target for the Arabs and the Al Saud, who, if you remember, weren't big fans of the Turks, and they started to ransack it. And then together with the British, they destroyed it during World War I. Today, what you'll find are remnants of the railway, and we'll see vestiges of that as we head north. As we head north, we will get to Al Ula, the cultural heritage capital of Saudi Arabia. Now, this was a stop not only on the Hejaz Railway, it's also been a stop for many hundreds of years on the pilgrimage route down to Mecca. And even before Islam, it was an important strategic trading route. It's an oasis which sits at a very strategic crossroads. And here you'll find a real variety of sites from different eras. You'll find the old town, which was continually inhabited for hundreds of years, right up until the 80s. You'll find shops, you'll find merchants' houses. It's all being well restored. But Al Ula's history goes back even further. You'll find this place Dadan, which dates back to the 1st millennium BCE. You'll find Jabal Ikma, which is a place where you will find over 500 rocks. They call it like an open air library. You'll find 10 languages here, some of them predating Arabic. But really, I would say the highlight of Al Ula, and for some people, the highlight of the whole of Saudi Arabia, is the city of Hegra, also known as Madin Salala. Now, if this looks vaguely familiar to you, or definitely if you've been to Jordan, it's because it was built by the same people that built Petra, the Nabateans. The Nabateans were an Arab people that flourished between about 1st century BC and 1st century AD, and they were masters of trade, masters of construction, and masters of water manipulation. Petra was their capital. Al-Ula, Madin Salah Hegra, was their second city. And you will find some similarities with Petra. You'll find a Sikh, you'll find lots of tombs. There are over 100 tombs here, but you will actually find more ornate tombs here, and you will find a fraction of the visitors that you might find in Petra. And my favorite place is this place called Qasr Farid, which at sunset really just captures the sun rays perfectly. And it was a great place just to wander around and really take up the ambience. Now, around the whole region of Al-Ula, there are some iconic rock formations. This is a famous rock called Elephant Rock, and at night especially, locals like to go there. They set up a little coffee place. You can get a snack there, and it's all illuminated, and it's really nice. And the entire region is stunning. I mean, it really, really is. It blew me away. And while we were there, we went on a journey of discovery. We went to a place called the Ragasat Mountains, which is full of canyons. There were camels wandering around. We took four-wheel drives into the region. We went for a walk, and it was truly, truly, truly spectacular. Now, interestingly, slightly bizarrely, when I was there at the beginning of 2020, it coincided with the second annual winter festival known as Tantora. And this is a real artist's heaven. As you can see, there were artist installations, there was lighting everywhere, but there were also pop-up Michelin-starred restaurants. There were private members clubs that had set up little kind of pop-ups around. It wasn't what I was expecting from my kind of cultural journey to Al-Ula. And then every weekend at this place, this is the Mariah. This is the world's largest glass building. And it is an exclusive events venue. It can hold 550 people. And every weekend during the festival, they put on a different star act. My weekend, I got to see Jamiroquai, and it was a rather odd experience to be there in this auditorium with lots of young Saudis, some dressed quite traditionally, some dressed absolutely like Westerners, all dancing around to Jamiroquai singing Cosmic Girl. It was a bizarre but incredibly wonderful, memorable experience, and it really felt like a country really on the turning point of some real change. On other weekends, you could have seen Lionel Richie, Andrea Bocelli, and the one I was most gutted to have missed, Sister Sledge. There you go, the Tantora Festival. Leaving Al-Ula and Lionel Richie, you head north on our trip. We go to another World Heritage Site. This is called Juba, and here you'll find petroglyphs dating back 7,500 years, with camels, with oryx, with ibex. From there, we then start heading eastwards. We hit a place called Burayda, which is surrounded by date palms, and it's said to have the largest date souk in the entire world. It's also home to a very impressive camel market, and camels are still prized possessions in Saudi society, and people will pay top dollar for them. From there, we go via a traditional village, Kudushaker, before finally arriving in the capital of Riyadh, which is a huge metropolis of 7.5 million people. And inside Riyadh, there are a few sites of real importance. First of all, there's the Mazmak Fortress, if you remember. This is the fortress that Abdulaziz, the father of the king, took in 1902 and really set in motion the Saudi kingdom as it is today. And inside you'll find that whole story told, as well as some wonderful kind of wood carvings. You've also on the outskirts of Riyadh got Diriyah, the place where Wahab fled to, again, to form that golden Lennon and McCartney relationship with the Saudi ancestors. And then right on the outskirts of Riyadh is this great place called Edge of the World, for obvious reasons, which is a really great place to go for a walk and to really see some stunning sunsets. Now, when I first put the trip together, some of the questions that came back to us were, why haven't you included the south of the country? Now, for those of you that may know, the south of the country is geographically quite different from the north. It's much more mountainous, and I did consider it seriously. And there were a few reasons why I ended up not including it in the group tour. Firstly, in order to access the southern region, the main access point is this place you can see here, Aba. Now, Aba's airport is also shared by the military. And being so close to Yemen, it is sometimes bombed by rebels in Yemen. And as a consequence, it's advised against by both the British Foreign Office and the US State Department, meaning that travel to the region is possible, but slightly tricky. Then it's the fact that when you're visiting the rest of the country between October and March, climatically, while you may get some bright sunny days in the south, you've also got an equal chance of getting thick fog, which can last for days, reducing visibility almost down to zero. And also for the fact that Saudi Arabia at the moment is still servicing local domestic tourism. And so Aba and the surrounding area mainly sees Saudis in the summer when they're escaping the summer heat, which means in the winter time, a lot of things were closed. So I will show you what it's like, and it is fascinating. And we may in the future put on a tour to the south, but it just didn't fit in with what we were doing in the north. So if you ever do go to the south, this is the type of thing that you'll see. These are the Asir Mountains. And inside the Asir Mountains, which share a border with Yemen, you'll find some hanging villages. This one's called Habala, and it dates back about 400 years. It was only accessible by rope, and it was built really to avoid persecution by the Ottomans. Then you'll find these wonderful fortified villages. This is called Ziain, and it dates back to the 8th century. And from the same era, you've got this place, Rija Alma, which was a major strategic trading point full of rich merchants' houses. And throughout the entire region, you'll see these fortified architecture, quite distinct. And if anyone did get the opportunity to travel to Yemen before it descended into the chaos that it is today, you might recognize some of the architecture as sharing a kind of common legacy with Yemen. And then you've got the empty quarter. Now, the empty quarter in Saudi Arabia is the size of France. If you want to explore the empty quarter, it is something which we are considering, but not just yet. And I would say for now, go to Oman. Oman still has some wonderful empty quarter scenes, and we offer trips there. It's much more accessible and something that you can actually do now. So that's the trip itself. With regards to some questions, which again often come my way when people are asking about practicalities of travel through Saudi Arabia, I'll try and answer as many or preempt as many of them that you might have. Accommodation, what's it like? Well, now that the Ritz-Carlton is no longer being used as a prison, you will find the Ritz-Carlton and other five-star hotels throughout the country. And it's worth mentioning that the way Saudi is thinking with regards to tourism development is very much top-end boutique, and it will take many, many years to build some of these places. But for example, around Al Ula, there are projects envisaged by Oman and Four Seasons. However, for now, and for the practicalities of our group tour, you are generally looking at 3- and 4-star, well located and comfortable, but fairly forgettable accommodation to take you on your trip. The one exception is in Al Ula, where we plan to stay in a fixed camp with private facilities, which really kind of gets you right into the desert feel of the region. Another question which sometimes people ask is, oh, can I do tailor-made? As Johnny mentioned right at the very beginning, we do tailor-made as well as small group tours. In fact, as a business, about 50% of what we do is tailor-made. But Saudi Arabia isn't yet ready for tailor-made. And the reason why is these two people. This is Lena and Adnan. They were two of my guides, and they were lovely people, and they were wonderful. But they're not yet ready to be guides independently taking people around. And one of the reasons for this is that when Saudi Arabia opened tourism in 2019, almost overnight, they signed up 800 people as guides. They could speak a little bit of English, they paid a license fee, and hey, overnight, you're a guide. They are inexperienced, and so that's why for our group tours, we'll still be sending a tour leader from the UK or from somewhere else in order to work with the local guides and train them up. But at the moment, they're just not ready, and especially when you're generally looking at costs of about $600 per day for a guide, it's not yet ready for a tailor-made experience, but it will be coming. Just give it 2 or 3 years. Food-wise, Saudi Arabia is actually maybe more varied than you would imagine. And if you think about the size of the country and the countries that it borders, it does have influences from its neighbors. So for example, near the south, you'll have wonderful bread from Yemen, which is just delightful, and date-flavored sweets, which I loved. I had dinner inside one of my guide's houses. And generally, when you go out for dinner, this is how Saudis generally eat in restaurants. They're sat on the floor, there's cushions, and food is put communally there. And we'll do at least a couple of meals this way. You will find more those conventional restaurants where you can actually sit on a chair and at a table. But full disclosure, restaurants are a bit of a tricky one in Saudi Arabia. Saudis are quite private people, and when they go out for dinner, they are often, if they're in a restaurant, will be in a kind of an enclosed booth, or they will go to a restaurant, pick up a takeaway, and then take it home. So it can be quite a challenge to try and find restaurants with a real sense of ambiance, but we will certainly try, and it's something that will change with time. Drinks wise, for local tea and coffee, some of the best coffee I've ever had. Coffee, the origins of coffee, you may know, come from Ethiopia, Yemen, kind of bordering the whole Saudi region. So there's a long history of coffee drinking there, but it is also 2021. So if you want your espresso, there is no shortage of good coffee shops. And also, it is 2021. Saudis are quite westernized in some of their tastes, and you will find the brands that you will recognize from home there. Alcohol. No, not yet. Not yet. There are rumors that, especially when the Red Sea development comes into play in a few years' time, they will grant licenses to some of the hotels for Westerners to be able to drink alcohol there. It's not there yet. So yes, you will be having a dry 11 days. But probably the most asked question that we get is, what's it like to travel in Saudi Arabia as a woman? Obviously, I can only answer that secondhand, but I did travel with some women in my group. And what I can tell you is that despite the progress and the developments, the vast majority of Saudi women are still dressed like this. You will see women wearing the niqab, wearing the abaya, but increasingly you will find Saudi women dressed like this, dressed as if they were in New York, in London, utterly free to wear whatever they want. And what I found really interesting is it doesn't have to be one or the other. So this is Lena, again, my guide, when we were out on the Red Sea doing a boat trip. And this is Lena just a few hours later when we were inside the old city of Jeddah. And she felt just very comfortable wearing the clothes that she felt most suitable with for the particular occasion. This was my guide in Jeddah, Abir Abu Suleiman. She was the first female guide to be granted a license. And when someone asked her why she chose to wear a headscarf, she said, "It's my choice." She said, "Trust me, my brain does not stop working just because I wear a headscarf." And she gave us, again, a little bit of an insight as to what's going on in Saudi women's thoughts at the moment. And even within families, there was a discrepancy. So this is Miriam Shalom. She is one of the country's top free divers. And this is her mum, Mariam Rimbachit, who was on the same boat with us, who chose to wear a full burkini the entire time. And there was no tension, no problems with that. And as a Western woman, I was generally told, honestly, within reason, wear what you want. You don't have to wear any particular type of clothing. Obviously, there's a common sense approach to it, but it really was much more liberal than I was expecting. And generally, the message that I got is everyone was happy that progress was coming, but they were also happy that they weren't being forced to adopt the changes, that they could take them or leave them as and when they saw fit. COVID. Yes, the lovely COVID. Has it affected Saudi? Well, obviously, no country remains immune from COVID, but generally, Saudi Arabia has dealt with it very, very well. They locked down very quickly. They stopped the religious pilgrimages to Mecca and Medina very, very early on, and they put a curfew in place. To give you an idea, the population of the UK is about 66 million, and we've had about 125,000 deaths. Saudi Arabia's population is about half that of the UK at 33 million, and they've had 7,000. And they've generally, on recent stats, seemed to be able to be keeping COVID at bay. And with regards to vaccination, they're not doing as well as the US or the UK, but they're not doing badly. They've done the equivalent of about 16.5% of their population. So they are getting there. As to the question, is it open for tourism? Not yet, or not yet for Brits and Americans. We're hopeful that it will be for the autumn, but again, the world is changing so quickly, it's just going to be one to watch. And really just to leave you with a thought that Mona, my driver in Riyadh, gave me. She said, look, if you want to know what the future for Saudi Arabia holds, we don't know. She said, but we've looked from a tourist point of view at Egypt. We've looked at Hurghada, we've looked at Sharm el-Sheikh, and we don't want that. But we've also looked at Dubai, and we don't really want that either. You know, we're our own country. We've got our own history, our own legacy. We will form our own path, and it will be our contribution to the world. And all I can say is, from my perspective, I loved it. I found it a real eye-opening experience. I felt very privileged to be able to travel there at this time. And I just found it a lot friendlier than maybe I was anticipating, and full of smiles and really wonderful memories that I had, and which I hope for those of you that decide to go, that you'll have too. Back to you, Johnny.
Mark, thank you very much. That was as riveting second time around as it was first time around, I'm pleased to say. Yeah, it's just, yeah, as the traveler in me, having not been to Saudi, I would just love to go, and hopefully one day I shall. So before we go to the Q&A, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about a couple of other things for Wild Frontiers. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Mark has just stolen my thunder on the COVID slide, so we can quickly skip that. But just to tell you, we have our own little Wild Frontiers TV site, so do go to that. It's literally www.wildfrontiers.tv, where we have lots of our good videos, so you can see plenty of the places that we go to. Here on the homepage is Walking in the Apennines. If you would like to book a Zoom consultation, we have a number of travel specialists that have different areas of expertise. They're on the Wendy Perrin Wow list, the Condé Nast Travel Specialist list, and the Travel and Leisure A list. So do get in touch and we can set up a Zoom consultation for any of our destinations. The Wild Frontiers Foundation, we set this up in 2009, and so far we have donated over £200,000, so some $300,000 to worthy causes in the countries that we go to. The reason why I put the slide in here is because normally when we do these events live at actual venues, the money we charge goes towards our foundation. And we've even done them in America. We did one in New York a couple of years ago. Sadly, obviously, we can't be doing live events at the moment. We're doing webinars, which we don't raise any money for. But if you did feel that after tonight you would like to give a few dollars to the foundation, we would be delighted to accept it. We built a school in Pakistan, which we run. We have women's empowerment projects across India and Southeast Asia. We have many different projects going on. So do have a look at that on our website. We still are operating under a reduced deposit. So it's $250 for a group tour and 10% for a tailor-made adventure. And everything comes with a COVID promise. And we have a particular COVID promise both for our American clients and for our UK and rest of the world clients. So do have a look at that. So just to kind of reiterate some of the group tour factors, maximum group size of 12, which is among the smallest in the industry, tour leaders and local guides, interesting and comfortable accommodation and transport, full board, so almost all meals are included, and a COVID health and safety policy. And as far as the tailor-made travel is concerned, full team of travel experts, expert knowledge of their areas, and very flexible booking conditions. So let's go to a few Q&As. We haven't got actually so many. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so we can see the pair of us. I'm going to start with Daniela. Daniela, I'm assuming you're a travel agent, which is great. And anybody else that are travel agents out there tonight, yes, absolutely. We certainly work with American travel agents, delighted to. We don't have an agent portal, but tomorrow in the email that we send you, we will give you the details of Sean, who is in charge of our sales. He's head of the sales team, and he will be delighted to talk to you about dealing with us from an agent perspective. Yeah, Mark, an interesting question this. Can you combine Saudi Arabia with any other country in the Middle East? And that is from Mike.
Yes, we are looking at ways in which one of the things which I think will be the most exciting is to be able to travel from Wadi Rum in Jordan and actually follow Wadi Rum as it continues into the western part of Saudi Arabia. At the moment, the border is open. It's obviously, there's still a lot of exploratory work going on. And obviously at the moment, it's not possible, but that is definitely something that we are looking at. And if you had to fly, there's very good connectivity going around the region. So no, definitely, if you're coming all that way, and especially if there are other countries in the region, it can be very easily combined.
Great, good. David asks, when is the winter festival at the Tantora Festival?
So generally, it starts around the beginning of December and goes through to around the end of February. Obviously, last year they had problems because of COVID, and it's generally focused in on weekends. I don't know who's going to be in the lineup next year, but it's an interesting one to watch. It can be quite in high demand because it is a very exclusive event. And one of the issues with Al Ula is there aren't that many places to stay at the moment. So tickets are limited. But yeah, if you're interested, it will be something that will be possible with time.
Can you tell Amy a little bit more about photography? She's asking whether it's allowed and are any areas or situations that are strictly off limits.
No different from kind of any other country. So again, you avoid taking photographs of military installations and ask people's permission. Some people will be very, very happy for you to take a photograph, others won't. So really, there's nothing specific about Saudi that I would say with regards to photography.
Interesting question here. I'm not sure whether the anonymous person that has asked it, whether they want them or they don't want them, but does the tour include evening cultural activities?
Let me think.
Myself, but I've also been to some very good ones. So yeah.
Generally, I mean, it's
other than Jamiroquai, of course.
Yeah, other than Jamiroquai. It's interesting because generally Saudis, if they go out in the evening, you'll go to coffee places, people will go for walks along the Corniche, people will generally hang out. There isn't really a great nightlife. It is still an evolving world and we're still on the lookout, but it's very much a kind of just sociable thing rather than major. It's not going to be your kind of nightlife fun capital place to go to, but it's changing kind of month by month, year by year, but I'd say for the time being, not oodles.
And Holly asks, when are the high-end hotels going to be completed and will your tour include them? I'm assuming, am I right in thinking Amman are even opening?
Yeah. It's basically, there's it's a bit of a 10-year, it's going to 2030. Most of those high-end hotels are going to be built in the next 2 to 3 years. And along the Red Sea coast, they are planning 50 very high-end boutique hotels stretched out right the way along, really kind of pristine Red Sea. With regards to will I be including them in the group tour? Probably not. A few reasons for that. One, they just don't really sit very well with a group tour. One, from a price point, these places, I don't know if you know Amman, Four Seasons, you may well be looking at, $600, $700, $800 per person per night. And in a way, it just is a bit of a waste because they offer so many amazing facilities, which are a little bit wasted when you are traveling through doing a tour. So no, I would say probably not is the answer. But from a tailor-made point of view, by the time that they are built, that is when I do believe that tailor-made will be coming to Saudi Arabia. And that is when I think that will be the time to start offering those options.
Yeah, I was going to say it's more of a tailor-made option, isn't it?
Yeah.
Barbara is asking, can you travel privately in Saudi Arabia? I know obviously you can't in countries like Iran. Can you travel privately in Saudi?
Yep, no problem at all. Yep, there's no no restrictions whatsoever.
Although, of course, we would recommend you travel.
Yes. Okay, there's no restrictions whatsoever, but it is worth bearing in mind that it is tricky. For example, the edge of the world, the place that we went to, there's no signs whatsoever. And when we got there, there was a locked gate fastening the door, and one of my guides needed to telephone the caretaker who only spoke Arabic. He then came 15 minutes later. Everything takes time. It is still a tricky destination to do. So if you are bold and adventurous, good luck to you, but it is not an easy destination, I would say, to travel around independently at the moment.
No, I mean, I would imagine, like a lot of countries that just open up to tourism, the infrastructure and the, as you say, the guides and things simply aren't there to make it so easy. A country like India, you know, it's relatively straightforward to travel on your own, but a country like Saudi, I imagine, is
not yet. Not yet. It will be, but not yet.
Right, a couple of questions that I think I'll answer because they're more based around general COVID situation. Sorry, I'm looking over here because I've got my other computer. So where do we think we'll open up first after the COVID crisis, or where are we opening up? Well, the brilliant thing from an American perspective, I mean, you've got all of us over here in Britain wishing we were American right now, because of course you don't have the same rather draconian rules about travel that we do in the UK. We have this traffic light system, which you may have heard of, where about 50 odd countries are on the red list, which means we have to quarantine in a hotel of the government's choice should we wish to come back from there. Amber list is slightly better, and we have about 3 countries we can go to on a green list. Now, hopefully that's obviously all going to improve as time goes by. Interestingly, we've already had Americans traveling to Nepal. We almost got a group of Americans traveling to Pakistan. Literally, well, they should be there right now, but the Pakistanis put a block on travel during the Eid festival because they didn't want a little bit of upsurge that was happening in COVID to be spread around the country. So we couldn't send them in the end. But the main countries, I think, probably will start off being Western Europe. I think they are getting their vaccinations quicker, catching up with the UK and America. I think that their rates of infection are dropping, and we're expecting most of those countries, certainly in the EU, to go onto the green list in the next few weeks. But then there are some anomalies. As Mark pointed to, Saudi is actually doing really pretty well on the vaccination front, and we would expect Saudi to both be accepting Americans and Brits be allowed to go there, probably by the middle of the summer, something like that, ready for the autumn season. Mongolia is another one that's doing really well. Bhutan is doing really well. Cambodia is doing well. Now, obviously, you've got to be able to get to those countries, and some of those are more challenging to get to than others. But I think, slowly speaking, the world is starting to open up, and we would hope that towards the autumn, things will be better. And then, of course, next year, you know, it'll be all systems go again. So stay patient. We will be here helping you with your travels as and when they become possible to do. So that's it. Oh, no, I can see I've got a couple more questions. Let's just have a look. Oh, not a question, but a comment. I'd love a Wadi Rum Saudi Oman combo. I'm not sure if that's a Ms. or a Mr. or a Miss, but Mr. or Ms. Locke, get in touch and we'll try and put it together for you. So that's it. There are the questions. Thank you so much, Mark. As always, incredibly eloquent and brilliantly described, and you know, I'm sure has whetted the appetite of everybody watching tonight. Thank you all so much for coming and watching the webinar with us. And as I say, we'll be in touch tomorrow with an email outlining all the various things you need to know, plus, of course, the link to tonight's webinar. So thank you very much, and good day to you.